Us versus them. I thought I'd make a small movie to maybe depict a little bit on how we are motivated in certain situations. If you're part of a group, you're part of us. If you're not part of the group, you're part of them. Now, this can take some seriously scary forms. In all fairness, if we look at the Second World War, us versus them basically got a lot of people killed. But we still live it today. And it still seems to be very much an issue that should basically scare all of us today, because there are plenty of groups that are still trying to make very clear that it's us versus them. Okay, so why is us versus them scary? Why is it even us versus them? Well, this is it. Basically, I start a group and you're either part of it or you're not. This is us versus them down to the basics. Now, why is that scary? Because it can get the group to do something against other individuals or another group that it would normally never thought to be capable of doing. In all fairness, I mean, if you look at the Second World War, it's the example I used a second ago, there were people in the Second World War who would never thought they would do the things that they did during the Second World War. On both sides, don't get me wrong, this is not a Nazi versus the Allies sort of thing. This is a people thing. Now, I can hear you think that, okay, this is something that happened during the Second World War, and maybe it happened afterwards, but surely it can't be happening now. But it is. And I can give you a few examples. I mean, not in the least place. Currently in America, they're busy with the pre-elections for the president. And it has a different name, but I'm not American, so I'm not going to bother trying to know it. I'm sorry. And one of the candidates, Mr. Trump, is already starting several us versus them situations.
We don't have victories anymore. We used to have victories, but we don't have them. When was the last time anybody saw us beating, let's say, China in a trade deal? They kill us. I beat China all the time. All the time. When did we beat Japan at anything? They send their cars over by the millions. And what do? When was the last time you saw a Chevrolet in Tokyo? It doesn't exist, folks. They beat us all the time. When do we beat Mexico at the border? They're laughing at us, at our stupidity. And now they're beating us economically. They are not our friend, believe me. But they're killing us economically. The U.S. has become a dumping ground for everybody else's problems. Thank you. It's true. And these are the best and the finest. When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
Now, Trump is obviously not the only one who's using the us and them sort of divide they can create in society, but for a future Republican candidate for the President of the United States, to me, that is a little bit scary. Unfortunately, there are a few other versions of us versus them, which are, well, creating several divides in our society. I mean, yes, it's terrible that we have politicians claiming that whole groups of our society are basically only here to hinder us, but there are even within the groups people starting divides. There are several us versus thems in those as well. For example, let's take the Black Lives Matter movement. And first off, I want to make it very, very clear. To me, Black lives do matter. Not more or less than anyone else's. But what happens when a Black Lives Matter group, subgroup of Black Lives, starts to create a situation where they value Black lives, in event theirs, more than the people they perceive as a threat. So basically, they are the us. Now, who is the them according to them? Because I see myself not as part of Black Lives Matter in this. The them, of course, are the white supremacy because they are suppressive towards them. Okay, fair enough. Black Lives Matter was started because the cops were targeting and killing black people, which is atrocious. There is nothing to say that will in any way make it sound like, yeah, well, of course, it's logical because it's atrocious. But how does attacking people in a library, white people in a library, make it any better? Are the people that attack other people not just as bad as the cops that they are blaming? The blaming of the cops is rightfully so, but wouldn't that automatically mean that the blaming of those attacking the people in the library is also rightfully so? And yes, I hear myself say that the cops are bad, and I have to clarify because obviously not all cops are bad. There are bad apples among them, and it's not just one or two, but they're not all bad. There are very good cops. They are there to protect you. They are there to help you. They're unfortunately not what I would call a silent majority, but yeah, they need to speak out. But within every group, there are rotten apples. There are very good black people. There are very good white people. There are bad black people. There are bad white people. Let's not think that the tone of one's skin defines a person. At the same point that I'm saying this, I want people to also realize this is just one of the many us versus thems. It's not just the black people being angry with the white supremacists, even though not every white person is a supremacist. I mean, these are people that are justifiably claiming that they need attention too. They need to be seen too. They need to be not only be seen as negative. Unfortunately, some of them then act negatively whilst they want to be seen in a not negative light. Guys, you're not helping yourself. And okay, enough about this. Let's go to another one. Feminism. Feminism is all about the position of women in society. They wanted to be equal to men, or sometimes even slightly more than equal. Fair enough. In itself, the concept of feminism, just like the concept of all lives are equal, is perfectly defendable, perfectly justifiable, and any society that doesn't hold this in its regard already basically has a problem. Now, in the Western world, all governments, all countries, kind of do feel that women and men are equal. But not according to the feminists. The feminists often see male, and therefore the patriarchy or male supremacy, as a problem, even though it's not really there. One of the most favored examples they bring is the pay gap, which isn't really a pay gap. I mean, in all fairness, if you take the average earning of a person for 30 years and you take into account the childbearing and child raising, which is often done by women, that period of time the women will have earned less than men. But there are also men that earn less in that period of time. People who, for whatever reason, can't do a job for a period of time. Just like raising a child is a reason why you can't do a job, there are other reasons why you can't do a job for a period of time. They will lose money as well. And if you take the average of 30 years, in those 30 years, all sorts of things can happen. But the funny thing is, if you just look at two people working at the same time at the same company, it's very likely that the female is earning, if not the same, slightly more, because this is what's happening now. And does that really matter much to me? No, not really, because you know what? If you're getting $15 an hour and I'm only getting $14.50, I should have talked better when they hired me. But the difference isn't that big of an issue. I mean, okay, that's okay. You can have 50 cents more than me or whatever. The problem becomes apparent when all examples given of why the patriarchy is bad and feminism is needed are so blatantly false. Because when we talk about other issues that feminism kind of wants to address, for example, violence at home, well, rape, which is obviously a problem, well, the pay gap, but we already mentioned that a little bit, and the role in general of females in society and the way they are perceived. Most of these things aren't true. For example, if we go back to violence in the home, there are homes where battered women can go to for shelter. There are no homes where battered men can go to for shelter. This happens too. I mean, maybe not as much as battered women, though roughly the same. And yes, rape is something that's more often done by men than by women, but it's done by women too. At the same time, a woman is more likely to harm her own child than a man is, which is also a problem, which is not the fault of men. And in all fairness, I'm not trying to shift the blame to women, because that's not the point. The point is you have bad apples in every group. Can we please stop using the us versus them way of thinking of like this? I mean, we're blaming each other for things that might as well happen to someone like us, which might be done by someone like us, given the circumstances. Okay, so I've given a bunch of examples of us versus them. I could give way more examples. For example, the way we think and treat the refugees from Syria, the way we think and treat about Muslims in our society, the way we think and treat certain groups within our society. We constantly do this. It's an us versus them. We basically point our finger at a group that's not us, and whatever we can blame them with, we will blame them with, because then it's their fault. They are the problem. If the problem is gone, in event them, then there is nothing wrong. This, of course, is bullshit, yet we keep doing it. And why did I finish with feminism? I could have just as easily started with it. It doesn't really matter. But feminism is one of the few us versus them situations that also kind of fights the solution a little bit. Because there is a solution to this all. We can stop this us versus them. And this us versus them can be stopped by being an equalitarian. Basically, everyone is not equal, but the same. And I'm changing the words equal and same here for a second, because, yeah, of course, I'm not equal to an NBA player, or I'm not equal to my wife. Of course, there are differences, but we weigh as much when it comes to making decisions. We both are important. Every person is important. As soon as you start talking about how women are more important than men, you're missing the point. As soon as you start talking about how men are more important than women, you're missing the point. You're part of the problem. The answer to the problem, well, it's easy said than done, but okay, the answer to the problem is let's view each other as equals. This means that we have the same advantages and disadvantages. And okay, you can give certain advantages to certain groups because it might help their position. But realize that by doing so, you already start a divide. Positive discrimination is still discrimination. And this is something that we should strive to have a society that can do without it. Now, I could have given other examples. For example, the rubbish happening at Mizzou, where at a certain point in time they were even complaining on Twitter that the people who are victims of a terrorist attack in Paris gotten more attention than they did. I mean, honestly, people, come on. I could have done the terrorist attack in Paris, where basically the victims are all of us and the perpetrators are the Muslims. Really? Are they? I mean, it's a handful of Muslims who done it, and I'm pretty sure that just about every Muslim organization has spoken out against it. But still, this is the trope we're going to use. This is the way we're going to see it, because it's an us versus them thing. Funny enough, the extremists are happy with that we do it like that, because extremists thrive on us versus them. Problems become clearer when they are us versus them, and it's easier. It's black and white thinking. It's polarization. We need to step away from the us versus them. Does that automatically mean that everything will go well? No, of course not. There will still be situations that will go bad. But then we can at least look at the situation. We can at least look at the problems instead of focusing on the us versus them. Anyway, these are my few humble thoughts on this. If you have thoughts on this yourself, please drop them down and I will read them.